Programming Throwdown, episode number 5, C#. Take it away, Jason.
Hey, so I was moving. Actually, I was packing and getting ready to move. I'm moving over to Silicon Valley, which is quite a large move from us over here on the East Coast. So
the heart of computer nerddom.
Yeah, I'm hoping we might be able to get some guest speakers on the show who actually write programming languages. It'd be pretty epic.
You're moving just for the benefit of the show.
That's right.
So considerate of you.
That's right. Taking one for the team. I'll do anything
just for our listeners.
Podcast. That's right. Anything for you guys to get you guys the information you need straight from the source. So
we sound like real journalists.
Yeah, that's right. So, but yeah, I'm moving over to the Valley and. It's been kind of interesting. I lived at home for the first few years of college and then got my own place. And, there's stuff kind of scattered, some stuff in my parents' house, some stuff at the place I live at now. And, this has sort of been like defragmenting, but for my entire life. So kind of like, I think it's a useful process. Sometimes you end up with so many different fragments on your computer hard drive and things start slowing down. You get some overhead. And so this is kind of how it was with me, where I could never really find anything. I had some stuff at my parents' house, some stuff at my place.
Your disk access was getting slow.
Yeah, that's right. My access for anything was slowing down. And so this is a chance for my family and I to sort of defragment. So we've been busy the past couple of weeks doing all that stuff and getting ready for the move.
So is it as painful as normal defragging?
It is pretty painful. It's one of those things where, a disk access, so like, someone getting mail or something will cause the whole thing to restart.
Oh.
Yeah, it can get rough. It can get painful. But what have you been up to?
Not too much. Pretty much same old, staying busy at work, so that's good.
Yeah.
Nothing drastic like moving.
Yeah, you didn't decide to just move or anything like that across country?
Can't talk about defragging my hard drive, I guess.
That's right. But all
right, well,
yeah, I think you can talk about some iOS stuff that's going on.
Yeah, so I was checking the news today and saw a couple of different people reporting that I guess it's still kind of a rumor thing, as everything is with Apple until Apple decides, as Apple people put it, until Steve decides to announce
That's
it.
Right.
And so they're saying that the new version of iOS is going to allow for over-the-air updates. So you don't have an iOS device. Oh, I guess you might have an iPod Touch. But having an iPhone, yep. I'm a frequent finder of plugging it in and having it tell me it needs to update and download, like a very large file and update my phone fairly frequently. So it's kind of a pain. It's pretty annoying to you're trying to sync up and get everything loaded, get your new podcasts on your device so that you can listen to them because you're out of good stuff to listen to. And so you plug it in and then you got to wait for it to download and do its thing. And it's kind of annoying. So pushing it over the air would be interesting, that you wouldn't have to do that anymore. It would just all of a sudden say a new one's available or just, do it. But of course, it leads to a lot of problems, right? Like, these are complicated devices with, different than a feature phone, which is, pretty small amount of code, relatively speaking, to something like, iOS, that, if you're trying to push an OS update like that, then, it's pretty complicated. But I think this is the commonplace on Android phones, that they do over-the-air updates eventually. Mm-hmm. But it's, always takes a little bit longer, and everybody want to make sure it's going to work because you don't want it to fail or crash and all that stuff.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about it is you have to have you have to be rather solid, like in your API. If the API changes as a result of an update and that breaks one of your apps, and this happens while you're on the road or while you're out on travel, this could cause, a serious problem. Let's say you had some app that was storing something that was very important, some time sensitive, like where your appointments are at this, destination, you're on work travel. Yeah, now the iPhone pushes out the update that changes the API and breaks your app, and you're hosed until you get back home.
Yeah, so hopefully then maybe they would limit this to only, minor revision numbers and not major revision numbers. Right. I don't know how that's going to work, but that's interesting. So this is, I guess, as a software developer, you got to think about this, how are you going to update and push out patches to your code? And then additionally, what's going to happen when you have to support multiple different users at different version numbers, because that becomes a big deal, and it can be very complicated to manage that. I know, especially people doing web programming, that's a huge mess, is how do you know all the different browsers are out there and all the different versions of those browsers, and it can just be a really large pain.
Right. The one who seems to have it the best, at least from a user experience standpoint, is Firefox. like Firefox, when you update it, it goes online and tries to find updates automatically for all of your extensions. And it must have some metadata in the extension where, host side, the extension can say, I support Firefox version 4.01. And if you upgrade to 4.02, it tells you that this, extension might not be supported. But then maybe as soon as 4.02 comes out, the extension writer on his side says, oh, this 4.02 works fine with my extension. No changes were necessary, or maybe they make the changes. And when you upgrade to 4.02, it either upgrades the extension or it doesn't. It says you're good to go. So Firefox seems to have this streamlined.
Well, I didn't even know this was happening until somebody said it, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. But Chrome automatically updates continually. Just whenever you start it, it just does it. It doesn't ask you, doesn't prompt you, it just does it.
Really?
Yeah. So that's to keep everybody on the same version or whatever. I'm pretty sure I heard that. I was just trying to Google here just a second ago.
Yeah, I believe it. I've never seen.
You've never seen it be update, right? Yeah, this is why. It just
either they're not doing anything or yeah.
It just does it, right? It just auto updates for you. So I mean, they're obviously that's another way to do it. Keep everybody, force them on the same version.
Yeah.
But it's something to think about because it makes a big difference. And like Jason was saying earlier, if you auto update and choose to go that path without prompting people and you ruin something, you're going to have a lot of angry users at you. And for somebody like Apple or, Google or the Mozilla Foundation, they may not care that 1,000 or even 10,000 of their users get upset that, a auto update pushed out and broke something. But if you're like most people and you work for a client base of just a few people or tens of people or hundreds of people, if you get any of those people lose work or clients or money because of your crashing, you're going to have some explaining to do.
Yeah, you're in trouble. I've always felt like there should be, I feel like install shields have been very streamlined and have become very open. Like there's that NSYS, Nullsoft scriptable install system, and every installer kind of looks the same. Every open source installer looks the same. It's because it is the same. There's this package of open source software that has installers, but all of them are static. There is no like open source living installer which will keep updating your software. And so for the latest open source software I've created, which is this MameHub project, I've actually tapped into Google Code. I created a Google Code project that just has the binaries of my open source project and one that has the source code. So I end up with 2 Google Code projects. And the binaries project, I just do a SVN update. So I'm relying on something that's meant for source code, but I'm using it, sort of hacking it so that it works on binaries.
And that's because you need all of your users to be on the same client.
Right.
Because it would cause confusing things to happen if they weren't.
Right. Everyone has to have the latest version. Otherwise, everything falls apart in this example.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. So there needs to be like an NSYS for applications that have a lot of updates, which is most open source applications. So there needs to be some framework. Someone needs to, try to buckle down, maybe, Apple or Google or one of these big companies and just release something out to the public, which I think that will help development and help, the use base of these, rapidly evolving applications.
Yeah, well, some stuff will be harder to do because you might not ever close it. Like some stuff just runs all the time, or server software just runs and runs. So that's where true. Something like Erlang's, hot swapping could be really cool, where you don't even have to bring down the software. Just the next call to a function just goes to the new function instead of the old function.
Yep.
And so that's pretty cool. So stuff like that is really interesting.
Yeah, that would be awesome. All
right. So let's say you had this amazingly cool installer core thing, and then somebody else didn't have the source code for it. How would they figure out what your software was doing? What tool would they need? What would that be called?
I think they would need a decompiler.
A decompiler? You mean the opposite of compiling?
That's right, yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about decompiling, which is something that you don't hear very often. Probably most of you out there have heard of compilation and compiling source code, but decompiling is actually taking, an object file, something you compiled already, and often it's the machine code or the assembly code, and taking that and reverse engineering it automatically. So a computer program that turns that back into source code, which is more human readable.
Interesting. So this came up because you saw an article that was kind of like a little tutorial about decompiling?
Right. So this comes with somebody explains they offer a decompiler on GitHub that you can download and play with. And they offer an explanation on how decompilers work with flowcharts and all those cool visuals, and a little step-by-step tutorial on what the process is of decompiling. And so I felt like this was very interesting and very relevant to anyone out there who writes code, in a commercial setting, or anyone who wants to take programs and you want to say, I wonder how this works, especially if it's maybe a smaller, simpler program, or if it's a DLL, a piece of a program. For example, the guys who write the hacks for 3D games, like the people who went in Counter-Strike Source and wrote that hack so you could see through walls. Well, they used a decompiler. And
wait, people cheat?
I know.
What?
It's a tragedy.
My world is shattering.
I think the world is just falling apart. The Omni mic has just broken in half. But yeah, the way these people do, and now, a lot of this, they get caught and things like that. So we don't recommend anyone cheat on Counter-Strike. And this isn't one of those faux,
Save your cheating for cheating your nephews at Candyland.
That's right. This isn't one of those, don't try this at home. Really don't. If you try to decompile, Counter-Strike Source and change the executable, they will ban you forever, and you'll have to buy all of your games back. So do not do that.
As we say nearly every episode, neither of us are lawyers, but I believe decompiling actually is against the DMCA.
That's right.
If it's a copyrighted, controlled source or controlled executable, in other words, if you try to decompile something in Windows or Source, Steam, if you try to decompile any of those things that basically somebody hasn't given you permission to do, yeah, bad stuff can happen to you. So don't do that.
Yeah, you'd be in trouble. Or
consult your lawyer first.
Yeah, that's right. Or maybe get a law degree and a software engineering degree. Then you can decompile.
And then email us and tell us the implications of decompiling stuff at programmingthrowdown@gmail.com.
That's right. So often what you would do with the decompiler, what one would do, is to take...
Against a program you have permission.
That's right. Is to take one of the DLLs that the program is using, one of the dynamic libraries. Often the libraries might be open source, like as the case with Glut. There's something called FreeGlut. And say, what are the function calls to this? And so if you were to decompile Glut, there's some function in there that has to do with, rasterizing triangles or setting up the OpenGL state. And in that function call, you might be passing in an alpha value. So you can actually, by using a decompiler, you can go to where it initializes the Glut state, and by default, make every triangle an alpha value of 50%. So make every triangle transparent by default, unless the game specifies otherwise. So chances are, in Counter-Strike 1.6 or whatever, all the triangles, they didn't care. They just made everything solid, or they didn't specify. So by going in, decompiling glut.dll, going in the source code and making all the triangles transparent, then recompiling, making a new glut executable and putting that back in, now you've changed the game. You've made it to where everything is transparent and you can see right through walls and cheat and see your enemies before they can see you.
That's crazy. So I'm not experienced that much at all in decompiling, but the transformation to go from source code to executable is fairly lossy. You lose a lot of information. So when you decompile, you're never going to find the original source code. You're just finding an equivalent representation of source code, so let's say C, that could have generated that executable. But you have no way of telling if it is the C file that generated it. In fact, you're not going to get variable names and stuff like that. Those will be just, machine generated. But you could have somebody could have written a for loop and you could decompile it as a while loop with a counter right after that. And machine code is exactly the same as what a for loop looks like.
Right. So it, like Patrick said, it's a lossy, compiling is a lossy operation. And so the code will often look just vastly different. And so oftentimes too, there could be errors in the decompiler. And when the code's recompiled, there could be corner cases that now fail, whereas it would have not fail, but return something different than they did before.
And I guess it causes problems with when you're in a high level language like C or C++, or higher level language like C or C++, or the higher you go, the worse it gets, because one instruction can map to many assembly instructions. And so trying to figure out heuristically what high-level instruction compiles to what machine code and then go back. I guess you look at call graphs and stuff like that to understand what the structure of the code is, so you can try to restore that and find patterns.
Now, there is decompiling at many different levels. So, for example, let's say I gave you a PYC file, which we talked about on the Python episode, which is, a executable or a binary file for the Python virtual machine, not for your actual machine. You could go from a PYC file to a PY file. So you're not dealing with any machine code. You're going for a machine code from machine code for this fake machine to the source code for that fake machine. So often, like, you'll have Python decompilers, but they won't actually deal with the assembly. And you'll have the C#, which is the language we're getting into, actually comes with an obfuscator, which is designed to prevent decompiling of the CLI code back into C#. And we'll talk about that a little more later.
So obfuscating your code would add instructions that basically do nothing, but make it that much harder to decompile because it's going to confuse those high-level structures that it's used to seeing.
Right, exactly. So you might have some for loop, and the obfuscator might turn into a backwards for loop, or might somehow add a nested for loop where the outer for loop just runs once. Just something that will throw off most decompilers.
Interesting. Seems like, too, the more optimized your code is, both in the way you code it and in the way the compiler settings are, the worse it would get.
Right. Yeah, so if there's a function that's inlined, then that function, when you decompile, will be inline. So literally, the contents of that function will be just pasted over and over again everywhere that function's called. And so that makes the code very hard to read.
Yeah, interesting. That's a good thing if you ever need it. There's a couple of tools out there to do that, and a bunch of but that's a whole art unto itself. And one place I know that a lot of decompilation is used is viruses. We were trying to think of this earlier, and it slipped my mind, but viruses and malware. People will decompile them because they want to understand better how they're working and what they're doing, so that they can write detectors for it, prevent those specific problems from happening again. So there's people whose lives or her work lives are devoted to decompiling malicious software and understanding, what it does and where it came from, because most viruses don't come with source code.
Right, that's right. And on the other side of it, people writing viruses, they want a way to have many different ways of injecting the same virus. So if they can look an executable, they can generate the call graph from that executable, and then they could put certain lines of the virus. They could split the virus up into modules and run different modules at different areas of the exe. So it's not just one big block of the virus. And that can be harder for things like Norton antivirus to detect.
Very cool, very cool. Well, the next thing I was going to bring up, I guess this gets kind of political, but this week AT&T has been the first major U.S.-based ISP to roll out caps for their broadband plans. So before, it was always just kind of like, however much you want to use, that's fine. Or if you were using way too much, terabytes of data, torrenting all day, then, you might get a knock at your door or a letter or, whatever. But that, there wasn't stated caps. They just let people do whatever. And now, not only are they giving caps, the caps are pretty low. It looked like, I was looking for DSL, it's 150 gigabytes, and for UVerse, 250 gigabytes. That's not a lot.
Not at all.
I mean, some Linux distributions can easily push, 4 or 5 gigabytes. If you're streaming HD movies from Netflix, you can hit that cap pretty quickly. Those are low caps. When I first saw this, I thought I agreed that the idea of going to capping is bad, because I feel like it's going to stifle innovation. And, you're not going to know what will never exist because people can't use their bandwidth to the fullest. But at the same time, I understand there's a lot of people out there abusing it, and I figured that the cap would be really high. But it turns out 250 gigabytes is not really high. That's just a little high, but you could easily conceive of where you might hit that.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're testing Linux distributions and you download, 5 or 6 of them. And let's say, in my case, I have 32-bit PC and a 64-bit PC, so I have to download Ubuntu twice. So, and that's just tertiary to just daily usage of the internet and YouTube and things like that. That's just on top of those things. So
yeah, I don't know that many people like this. I mean, I understand that they're a business, right? And they're losing money, so they can't keep spending money to keep up with the top 1% of users. So they got to come up with some way to do that. But I just feel like this isn't the right way. I feel like it's too potentially them motivated by trying to prevent the streaming of internet video, that
Right.
they really feel threatened. I mean, I'm probably part of this problem, right? I canceled my cable. I don't have cable anymore. I wasn't watching it. I watched my stuff on Hulu and Netflix and YouTube, and I have my PC hooked up to my computer, or my PC hooked up to my computer, my PC hooked up to my TV, and I just watch stuff from the internet. And so I don't need cable. It was a waste of $50 a month for me.
Yeah, I believe when I move, I'm actually not I'm gonna try and go cable-less. So I've been with
Is
cable.
this because of me? Have I inspired you?
You have. It actually is because of you. No, true story. Oh man. But no, when I was sometime in high school, I was really asking, I want cable. And it was when, South Park was new. I really wanted South Park, to watch South Park. And so, we got cable, and I've just had it ever since. I'm going to try to go cable-less. And, the big thing that you miss out on is sports.
Sports, yeah.
And, but now, like, a lot of them, ESPN.com is doing streaming on the internet.
Yeah, but you actually have to have a cable subscription to be able to stream
Oh,
ESPN.
really?
Yeah,
It checks it. So somehow
it knows.
it ties your IP to...
My dad has cable, and he can watch ESPN on the internet from wherever he wants. But I don't have it on my cable plan, and somehow they know because I can't register for it.
Oh, how does that work with the phone? Because can you watch ESPN on your phone or no?
Oh, not on my phone, no.
Oh, okay.
I don't know case by case how it works, but
yeah, sports is really the only thing.
And I think MLB has a package even on a Roku box and on almost every platform where you can watch Major League Baseball. On pretty much any of our non-US listeners are going to be like, "What are these guys talking about?"
That's right.
But that's okay.
Yeah,
I think in Europe they've always had caps or tend to have caps more than we do, and they have even less competition than we do. So
yeah, I have a friend in Australia who has a cap of 250 gigabytes, and he says he never comes close. So it's hard to say what their use case is over there, though. Or they use
the problem is, I agree. I 100% agree. On my iPhone, I have the unlimited data plan I was grandfathered in, and I look and I've. My total usage, my average usage, so if you take, how much I've used total since I've had it divided by the number of months I've had it, I probably just offended a bunch of people that had to explain that. But if you do that, right, my average is like way, low. It's not that big at all. And in fact, it's, basically smaller than their small plan. But then there is 1 or 2 months relating to when I was normally on business travel or personal travel to places that pay for internet in the hotel or whatever, that I use my iPhone a lot.
Right.
And on those months, I went well over those low caps.
Right.
And so those months, I would have been smacked with a huge bill.
Yeah, the other thing, too, is it seems like, and I don't know too much about network infrastructure, but I'll go on a limb here. It seems like the solution to this is something akin to IPv6, right? Where the internet is multi-tiered. And so, for example, if let's say we're using IPv6 and we're both under the same 5th or 6th octet, so we'd still be under Bright House. In this case, we could I could maybe query your computer and say, hey, Patrick, have you watched this YouTube video? Or anyone else within my neighborhood, let's say, and say, have you watched this this YouTube video? And if they have, get the video from them. It seems like you could more intelligently distribute the bandwidth. If bandwidth is really the issue and not just making money being the issue.
I agree. There was their incentive to pioneer those efforts, though. I mean, because ultimately people are just going to use them to not pay for cable. And since a lot of the internet service providers are also content distributors here in the United States, I don't feel like they would be motivated to do that. But you're right. I mean, that's how, and this is not by any means my expertise, but that's how cloud centers work a lot. Like if you're at a data center, if you're transmitting within the data center, you basically don't have to pay bandwidth costs.
Right.
You only pay bandwidth costs if you have to leave the data center. And that's for that very reason, like what you're describing.
And as the stock market expert sitting next to me knows, that's how I believe you explained to me one day, that's how the stock market works, right? Like there are these different
brokers.
tiers.
If you go through your non-direct access broker, so just like an E-Trade or a Charles Schwab or Scottrade, then they'll try to match your orders within their own customer base, because then they charge you a commission, but they don't have to pay a commission.
Right.
And then if that doesn't work, then they try to go to like next neighbor partners and slowly work their way up, and out of the last resort, put it actually on the open market where they have to pay all sorts of fees and stuff.
Right. So the infrastructure is, not the infrastructure, but the historical, use case is there. So, the idea of this, different strata and, trying to look locally, these techniques are used in many different avenues. And the fact that they aren't used in the internet distribution, mechanism, and instead they're going for caps makes me think that it's not actually, based on these huge operating costs, but it's based more on just restricting content.
So talking about bandwidth caps, would you have had any reason this last week to hit your bandwidth cap?
That's right. So I definitely would have hit just about any bandwidth cap because Natty Narwhal came out, which is Ubuntu 11. And I went ahead and got the 32-bit and the 64-bit. And I think there was one that was DVD size, one a live CD. I managed to get it on a USB stick for one of my computers that doesn't have a CD drive. So I went ahead and updated to Ubuntu 11. As many of you know, I'm a huge Ubuntu fan. So
how do you like it?
I think it's awesome.
So what are the big differences?
Yeah, so
other than being an awesome horned creature from the sea.
Is that what that is?
A narwhal, yeah. That's the thing with the big spiral tusk horn that's a whale.
Is that from like Lewis Carroll or something? Or
no, it's real. It's an actual animal.
Oh, this is a real thing? Oh, I was thinking like the Jabberwocky. He's like the Jabberwocky's cousin or
Jason.
something.
We don't have any biology.
Biology fail, that's right. So one thing about Ubuntu is they awesome. They adopted the Windows Aero, Mac OS X idea of using the GPU and to do graphical effects and to run the window manager. So it's really slick. It's got different. It actually pops up from the side. I guess they just did that to be different than Windows and OS X, which have the bar by default at the bottom. But yeah, this bar comes up in the side. It's very search driven, which I thought was interesting. So at the first time, if an app isn't pinned onto your, taskbar, and most of you who run Windows, 7 or Vista or OS X know what it means to pin something. If it isn't pinned on there, you have to search for it by typing in the beginning letters of the app you want, rather than having like a start menu or something like that.
So it doesn't even have a start menu anymore?
Yeah, that's right. So It has like these categories, and then you can kind of scroll through, but it's very,
It's not encouraged to do it that way.
Yeah, you're definitely encouraged to click on the start button, or I guess the Ubuntu button, and just start typing. Like if you want.
Is it a narwhal? You wouldn't know because you don't know what a narwhal is.
Yeah, I think I'll go back and find out. I think it will be a narwhal the whole time. It's just laughing at me. But you can click on it, start typing in Xterm, and Xterm will pop up. But yeah, the interface is slick. There is one issue, which is, because it uses direct rendering, it uses OpenGL, it doesn't play nice with VNC. Which is the, what does VNC stand for? Do you know?
Virtual Network Client?
Let's look it up.
All right. So anyways, but continue on.
Yeah. So basically,
virtual network computing.
There we go. So, VNC is a way that if you don't have a monitor, if a machine is headless, you can get a GUI onto that machine.
All right. What is headless?
So headless means that there's no actual physical keyboard or monitor. So for example, I have a server, in the office room, which just sits and runs. It has no USBs coming out of it plugged into anything. It just has the network cable.
And the power cable.
Right. Yeah. The power, probably something else. But yeah, basically, what I do is I VNC into that machine and I get a picture of my desktop inside of, another computer's, windowing interface. So VNC has issues with Ubuntu 11, and it turns out XDMCP, which is alternative to VNC, also doesn't work in Ubuntu 11. But there is something called FreeNX, and I was a little skeptical to install it because the installation process is a little bit time consuming. It was this multi-step process you have to get on the internet. But I went through the process, and I can spare you guys the angst by telling you that it definitely works and it's sharp, and that's the way to go if you have a headless machine running Ubuntu 11.
So everything works good now, and it's beautiful, and all is well in the narwhal-laden lands of the sea?
That's right. I mean, the narwhal, they're singing away.
I'm sorry, I'm very still stuck on this. I will probably teach you this for many months to come.
Oh, man. Oh, the other thing, if you run VirtualBox, which many of you do, and if you've never used Ubuntu before, VirtualBox is a program which lets you run a virtual OS inside of your OS. And it's completely free, and you can use it to test out Ubuntu and find out if you like it and if you want to switch over to it. But if you use VirtualBox, you have to change some of the VirtualBox settings to make it work with Ubuntu 11. And so go on the internet and look that up.
Yeah,
so you can get
that was my case.
experience.
I installed it on VirtualBox on one of my Windows PCs, and it was like, this looks the same. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'll have to figure out later what happened.
Yeah, that's right. It'll if you go on the internet, you can find a whole tutorial on it. So
the internet just full of information.
That's right. That's right. As we talked about in another episode, I think we've gotten to the point now. We have to use a YouTube video to figure out how to pull up our pants or something. So
well, it's that time of the show. The tool of the bye week.
Tool of the bye week. So what's your tool, Patrick?
So my tool of the bye week is the VLC, which is, oh man, that's not VNC. It's VLC.
Oh, that's right.
Which stands for
I'll look
Video
it up.
LAN. I don't know what the C stands for.
I'll look it
Video
up.
LAN something. Anyways, and so VLC is a movie player, open source, and what it does really good is it's supports all the different operating systems, and it allows you to play pretty much any protocol or codec that you can think of. Not every single one, but nearly everyone. I don't know if I've ever run across one that it hasn't. And it's really powerful. It's one of those tools that most people use probably like 5% of the features. It'll do, transcoding for you. So taking from one codec to another. It allows you can stream stuff over the internet. So, you could like log into IP cameras with it and stream video from live cameras, like security cameras, just tons and tons of things. But the reason that most people use it and the reason that I love it is because, and I don't know if it's compiled in or they have their own implementations, but basically all those codecs that if you ever like try to run media player on Windows or any sort of video players on any system, that they don't necessarily always have the right codec. You got to go find the right plugin and install it, and it's annoying. VLC just has all of that in its package. It's just handled for you. It's taken care of. So if you have a file that won't play or says can't find codec or whatever the error is, I always try to play in VLC, and they seem to have a really robust implementation that files that won't work in anything else tend to work in there. So whatever they've done a really good job.
Yeah, so VLC stands for Video LAN Client.
Client, I was not that far off.
They do have a server, I think, for like streaming video out to other computers, like a proprietary format. It does use the
Well, not proprietary, but maybe unique.
Yeah, that's true. I guess proprietary. Yeah. But their own unique, their custom format. VLC, most of the codecs are based on FFmpeg, but they've hacked it a little bit to be a little bit more robust, as Patrick was saying. The thing I like the most about VLC is that, and maybe you could do this in Windows Movie Player, but I haven't been able to do it. You can open up several videos at the same time, like several instances of VLC. Like I
don't have multiple sets of eyes and ears.
You could
just kidding. Yeah, no. So if you wanted to like show multiple demonstration videos or
that's
processing
right.
results,
or if you want to have one in the background and look at one and look at the other without having to switch between them in the playlist or something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. But yes, playing
busting my chops today, man. Look I had to pack all day.
And then you gotta listen to me ragging on you. Yeah. All right, but one cool thing that VLC. So VLC you can just download. It's not that big. Install it, and be off and running, and be so glad you heard this tip. And it'll save you tons of time and pain and harassment. But a thing I like to do is put it on my thumb drive, and they have a portable version, which we're going to talk about here in a minute a bunch more. But a portable version just means that you install it on a USB drive, and you still have to know what platform you're going to be on. So in this case, it's like a Windows one, and most of these portable apps are Windows apps. They probably have similar things for Linux as well. It's a little different case there. But you put it on a USB drive, and what it does is it only writes locally. So if it writes anything, it's going to write it local to whatever the install folder is, or it's not really installed. It's just extracted there, or it won't write anything at all. So that way, if you have VLC, the portable version on your USB, it doesn't change the registry. It doesn't install anything. So you stick it into a computer, and as long as you can see the USB drive, you can run it. And then you can watch videos. So if you're ever at somebody else's house or whatever, and you're trying to show some video and they don't have it, they don't have the right codecs, whatever, instead of going out and trying to figure out what you got to install, you just open up VLC and run it.
Right.
So what now that you like VLC Portable, but you had some other portable apps that you had on here that you were interested in for your tool of the bye week.
Yeah, my tool of the bye week. Actually, it relates a little bit to our last podcast where we covered MATLAB, but it's FreeMat, which is a free and open source version of MATLAB that includes like the GUI, the a version of Octave, I believe, to handle the virtual machine, and it's also something I have on my thumb drive. So there's a website, PortableApps.com, and we'll put a link to this on the episode in the blog. But basically, the way Portable Apps works is you install this Portable Apps. I guess what would you call it? Platform onto your USB stick, and
it's like a launcher. It's really, you don't have to have it, but it's a launcher.
Right. It's a launcher, and the newest version is also an auto updater.
Oh, that's good.
And so the new version is pretty slick. It creates a second start menu as long as you have your USB stick plugged in. So you have your regular start menu with the all programs and the control panel and everything. And it pops up this second start menu, which is your portable apps menu. And you see all the apps on your thumb drive. And you can use this in airports, at airport kiosks, public terminals. You can use this at like hotel lobbies, and you have access to all of your apps. So you almost have a fully functional computer. Like you can carry around many of your favorite applications with you wherever you go, and it's very consistent. So definitely check out Portable Apps. And if you liked our last podcast on MATLAB and want to kind of play with it in a very controlled environment, definitely check out the FreeMat portable app.
Yeah, it looks like they don't use Octave or any of the other MATLAB open source interpretations. It looks like they have their own, trying to go above and beyond even what MATLAB does and offer other features. So, So it looks like they aren't the same, but in the summer time, so maybe we should have had it in last week's podcast already. So
that's right.
Thank you for correcting that deficiency.
Yeah, if you've used MATLAB before, I've used MATLAB and used this before, and they're both extremely similar. I mean, the syntax is virtually identical. So if you have a certain graph or a certain set of data points and you just want to see what that looks like on paper, this FreeMat application will still get you where you need to go. But yeah, it's interesting. It looks like it's not based on Octave or any of those.
So two good apps of the week.
Yeah.
I think it means it's time for our feature segment.
That's right. C#. Sort of a controversial language.
Is it? So, okay, I have a question.
All right.
C#. I see it as C# or C#, or C. Why C#? I mean, I know it's a sharp symbol from music, but it's always the pound sign.
Yeah, so I think, putting me on the spot here, putting me in the sweat room, I think that C#, when a note is sharp, it's like better or higher than the regular note. So I think their implication here is that C# is like a higher level of C.
Oh, so kind of like C++.
Yeah, similar.
So like increment C.
Yeah, maybe it's like their way of, one thing is the sharp symbol does look like two pluses that were put too close together. And so maybe it was sort of their way of both paying homage to C++, but also saying, here's something even better at the same time.
Okay. All right. So now that we got that away, because that's always the most important thing, is understanding why a programming language has the name it does.
Right. That's right. If nothing else, you could say that at an interview and people would just assume you're an expert.
I wouldn't try that.
No, don't do that at all. C# was created by Anders. I'm probably going to butcher his name, so
that's always good when you start off saying it that way.
Yeah, that's pretty much. Like, this is a true story, right? Anders Heilsberg he's a Danish software engineer. So
I'll take your word on it.
He was the original author of Turbo Pascal, and he was the chief architect of Delphi. So he definitely has a strong background in programming languages, and so he's currently the lead architect of C#, and he was also the inventor. So
was he just sitting in his sofa one day and his lazy boy? Oh, he just thought, I'm going to make better than C++, C#, or was this part of his job?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, there was a battle between Microsoft and Sun at the time.
Sun they didn't agree on something?
Yeah, shocking.
Appalling.
Well, I don't know. Does this mean Microsoft won because Sun doesn't exist anymore?
No, they did. They got bought.
Yeah, they're Oracle now, so maybe
they got assimilated.
Yeah. it's hard to say whether that's a good or a bad thing, but
I don't work for them, so I don't know. You'd have to ask somebody who worked for them.
Yeah.
Maybe you know.
No, I don't work for either.
No, I mean our audience.
Oh, I see. You, the fourth wall. Yeah, but basically, Sun came out with Java, which was very popular. It was adopted by the academic community very early because of its because of it being completely open source, or at least I should say open standard. Java wasn't open source, and cross-platform. So it was
varying levels of the true interpretations of those words.
Yeah, yes. It has become more open there is like an open JDK now and things like that. But at any rate, the academic community jumped on it. They also have many different advantages, which we'll talk about later. But Microsoft sort of wanted in on this, and so the Anders Heilsberg went to Microsoft and started working on J++, which was Microsoft's implementation of Java. So basically, there was a lawsuit. Sun sued Microsoft, and as part of the settlement of that lawsuit, Microsoft had to abandon J++ and cease work on that. So that's when Anders decided to make a new language called C#. And so that's kind of where C# was born from as a competitor to Java.
That's an interesting and storied history, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
So the C#, whenever I see this, I see these words CLR, CLI. What is that?
Yeah, so as people who frequently listen to our podcast know, many of these machines are interpreted and they run on a virtual machine. So as the case of Python, you have a Python virtual machine with its own, virtual RAM and virtual instruction set, etc. And we talked about that with the PYC files, etc. So CLR is the Common Language Runtime, which is just a fancy way of saying the virtual machine for C#. Interestingly, though, there are several languages that can run on the same virtual machine.
So if I'm remembering right, the CLR was kind of started the idea for it, and it drove C#.
Right.
So CLR was kind of coming first, and then C#'s features were designed to work on the CLR.
Right. So the CLR is CLR is basically the virtual machine for C#, in the same way as the Python virtual machine is the machine for Python. So you can't write code in CLR, but it does sort of set the groundwork.
There's not
So code in the code that runs on CLR is called CLI.
Okay.
Yeah, which is what does that stand for? I think that's let's see.
Common Language Instruction? That's my guess. So you can't write in the virtual machine because it's a thing, it's a platform. But you could write at this whatever it's assembled.
Common Language Infrastructure. So that is basically the bytecode. So you could write code in CLI and it would run on the CLR. Just like you could write PYC files directly.
If you were weird.
But yeah, you'd have to be quite the guru to do that. Most people, interestingly though, so in the case of Python, if you want to create a PYC file, you have to use the Python programming language. Not the case in C#. You can use C#, ASP.NET. There's Managed C++, which is another language, Visual Basic.NET, J#. All of these languages compile down to the same CLI code that runs on the CLR.
So that's kind of interesting. So it is, kind of a virtual machine that's meant to support a lot of different languages.
Right. And so you think about it, they're trying to consolidate because Microsoft has this huge base. They have a lot of people, or at the time, they had a lot of people using ASP in Visual Basic. They had a lot of people writing C++, what are those called? C++ in a web application. CGI. People writing CGI modules in C++. There were people, starting to adopt Java that needed something to fall on. And so all of these people, they wanted to create a virtual machine, one machine to unite them all. So
one to bind them.
Yeah, that's right. And so they'd use CLR and CLI. So now a lot of this is like Microsoft, kind of research, closed doors, like them sort of, hashing this out. And it's not open source at all. But some people have gone on and tried to open this technology.
Now, they don't sell the CLR or the CLI, right? I mean, those are
Right.
pretty much included. Like, you can just download them with Windows.
Right. So it's part of the .NET framework.
Oh.
So if anyone's ever gotten that Windows
I get that
update-
all the time.
Yeah. So you're getting updates to the CLR and the CLI.
Oh, they're sneaky. This is very well themed. We've been talking about auto updates all along. But yes.
Yep.
So they give that away for free.
Right.
But then the compilers and the tool, I mean, that's the stuff that they make their money off of, is the compilers that compile from these languages to these bytecode forms.
Right. And as we move on to, and also this sort of, as we talked about vendor lock-in in the last episode, if without any open source backing, if you were to compile a C# application, you would have to run that application on Windows because the CLR and the CLI only exist for Windows.
Oh. So if a person has a language or has programs they've written and they want to run on Linux, do they have no choice?
Well, there is an open source version of the CLR and CLI. It's called Mono.
Oh.
And
okay.
do you know anything about Mono?
I think that's a sickness. Right?
Oh, other than that's right. But yeah, Mono.
No, it's got a pretty cool little mascot, right? Like
Does it really?
Some sort of like cat.
Oh, I thought it was oh no, I'm thinking of Silverlight. Mascot is a moon.
But yeah, no, I mean the Mono is kind of the answering my own question, kind of the answer to an open source CLR, CLI, so that people could port it to Windows. Otherwise, somebody would have to, like we talked about before, either, reverse engineer the CLR that Microsoft released or look at their standards and try to create it themselves. But the Mono allows you to actually do that. They've done that for you.
Right. That's right. So, and I would say the biggest, the people who use C# the most would be people making websites. So web portals, many websites you go to where you see, .aspx as the extension. You know how most websites might be .htm or .html. Mm-hmm. Some are .aspx. And that is something that's running on the CLI. So it's a website that's being driven by C# or VB.NET or one of those applications. So I would say the web constitutes probably 95% or maybe even more of C# use cases.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of enterprise people on Windows who use C# for a lot of stuff. I mean, personally, I've used it for GUI development and it works really well for that on Windows if you just need to bang out a really quick Windows app.
Oh, that's true.
That's true. I mean, I feel like it has a lot of uses. We were trying to look around and see, what major well-known programs or projects use it, and we couldn't find a lot. But I think it has a lot of use. A lot of people doing not just web stuff, but a lot of other stuff in it too. It's actually reasonably good to work in. I like it a lot for having to do Windows stuff.
Yeah, it's really tied into Visual Studio, which makes sense because it's all, an integrated solution.
It's all controlled by Microsoft, so they can really make that integration good.
Right. So, I mean, you can just drag and drop buttons onto, while you're in Visual Studio, you can drag a button onto a frame. It'll put that button there. You can double click on it, and it'll create a function callback routine, which will get called when you click the button. And it'll take you right to the code where you can just start banging away code. When someone clicks this button, I want to increment this variable. And so it's very efficient, very quick.
So I was completely wrong. Mono is Spanish for monkey. And so the mono little symbol is a stylized monkey's face.
All right, mister. I know everything about narwhals.
Yeah. You weren't helping exactly any. Okay, anyways, this is not the programming throwdown. Is not mascot throwdown.
That's right.
We'll save that one for another show.
But similar to Microsoft's implementation, you can program in C#, F#, Java, Scala, Boo, Merely, VB.NET, Python, JavaScript, and the list goes on and on. You can program in any of these languages, and Mono will find a way, unless you're using some crazy specific library, to convert the code that you wrote into CLI.
Yeah, so a lot of those languages actually have variants of them that run for the CLI. I'm confusing those. I'm probably getting them wrong, but that's okay. So, like, for instance, Python, right, is Iron Python, I think is the name.
That's right.
Of the dialect, name it what you are. It's not exactly the same because it's a different implementation. So there's nuances that are different.
Right.
And, I think there's also an Iron Ruby. So something similar that, I don't know what the Iron thing is about. But yeah, so they've got dialects that are for instead of compiling down or being interpreted to whatever you interpret them for this. So anywhere where you have the CLR, you can guarantee that it's going to be able to run.
Right. The biggest thing about the, and this is sort of pedantic, but we'll talk about it for a little bit. The .NET framework and the CLR, the virtual machine, doesn't support reflection. And they're working on it, actually. I think that the next version will support reflection. But so many of these, like Iron Python and Iron Ruby, what they've done is they've taken the self-modifying code and the reflexivity, they've taken that out of the language.
So you're not talking about reflections, a thing that vampires don't have.
No. So do you know what reflection is? I'll put you on the spot.
No, I could guess. It's not going to be pretty.
Okay,
just take
I'll give it a shot. So this probably won't be pretty either, but I'll try my best. So reflection is essentially knowing about the language while you're inside the code at runtime. So in other words, in C++, you create a class called foo, and that class has an X and a Y position, and you can put foo at different places on a grid or something like that. While you're running the code just knows about memory and pointers and adding. It doesn't know about foo. Going back to decompilers. Decompiling is so hard because the machine code, the assembly code, what you get at the end of a compiler, doesn't know anything about classes or structures or functions or any of that. So in contrast, if a language is reflexive, that means that the details of the language, so the classes, what variables are in that class, what kind of type those variables are, is built into the executable. And so you can do things like take all the variables inside foo and add 1 to them. So that's something you can't do in C++. So you'd have to say foo.x plus 1, foo.y plus 1. But, in Python, you can say, take all the variables in foo and add 1 to them, because the language at runtime knows about itself.
So is this how something like Python also handles dynamic typing?
Right. That's right.
Where you don't specify what a variable is, and so it can't be known until runtime. So reflection is what has to be used for the code to be able to determine at runtime what type it is and what to call when you do a plus 1. Is that a string and you're adding the character 1 to the string, or doing something different, or is it just an integer? Is it a float? Because all that has to generate separate code. So that's how they at runtime determine what code to run?
Yeah,
is that reflection?
Kind of. So there are some things which are done with what's called a virtual function table. So you can say, a plus equals 1, and then you have this VF table, and this even exists in C++, which says, okay, a is a string, so that means I need to call this plus routine, or a is an int, or a is a float, so call different routines. But that works only at a low level, so dealing with an individual object, but it doesn't know about the higher structure. So something like what you described is like reflection at a really low level.
Okay, so it's more powerful than that.
Yeah, so reflection implies this high level reflection that includes like the classes and the functions and things like that.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So what do you think are some strengths of C#?
Yes, I already talked about one a little, having done a fair amount of C# programming, not a ton. It's not my primary language, but again, a lot of the purpose of this show is to talk about tools in the toolbox, and I think C# is definitely one. If you're going to do Windows programming and you need to do GUI, it works really well. I don't know why I'm obsessed with this as being the main strength, but it just is. I really like that fact, and I never really did good GUIs or had good success doing Go. I always felt it was complicated, never made a lot of sense, and was hard to do. And I don't know if it was just Microsoft's products maturing to the point, Visual Studio maturing by the time I started using C#, or if it was a fact of C# itself, but that's what I've really liked doing in it. And I find that, being primarily a C++ coder, that a lot of that just works in C#. Not always, but, you can start writing code and then just kind of fill in the little bits and gaps when it doesn't work.
Right.
And so it's very nice from that.
Yeah, C# has a GUI for creating the GUI code. So in other words, you can drag and drop different buttons, as we talked about. And so, when you're creating a GUI, the whole experience is very visual, even from a developer standpoint. And not many tools out there give you that sort of drag and drop, WYSIWYG sort of feel as C#.
So what about you? What do you like?
One thing I really like about it, I used this in a previous job. It's the dynamic HTML support. So it's sort of like PHP, if you've ever used that. where you want to make some website which is driven by a database or by some other data source or by some logic, maybe based on time. C# can do all of that, similar to PHP, but then I feel like it's a lot cleaner than PHP. And so it lets you do some pretty complicated things, and especially if you're using the Microsoft SQL database, those two work in tandem to really make web programming easy on you as a developer.
I talked a little bit about knowing C++ and using C# from there, but also, I mean, if you have some C++ code that you need to call in C#, that's not a terribly complicated thing to do. I've had some C# GUIs I made that needed to, for instance, use some serial communications code that talked out over the serial port. And I was able to pretty much just put that in with very minor massaging, able to get that to work in there. So that was really easy. A lot of languages claim they have good C++ integration, but here it really is good.
Yeah, a lot of languages suffer there, and C# excels there, definitely. And it's because, as we talked about, you can compile C++ and C#. They both get compiled down to the same language, which is that intermediate, that CLI. So that's what makes it so easy. One of the weaknesses, I think, about C# is, and again, a lot of people compare C# to Java because it was created sort of as an answer to Java. And C# doesn't have an applet. Really no language other than Java that I know of. And I guess C++ if you're using ActiveX controls and things like that. But nothing besides Java does the applet, where you have this box in a website, and that box just runs the Java virtual machine. You can do whatever you want. You can write any logic you want. C# can create HTML, can output HTML, but Java can actually run inside of the virtual machine and do computation on the client side.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of a love-hate relationship with me and applets. They're kind of a cool idea. It's kind of nifty, but oftentimes they're just so slow to load and execute, and it'll crash a web page or your browser for no apparent reason when you try to go somewhere. So, but it definitely has its uses.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can see a lot of I was looking at some website the other day on how red-black trees work, and they actually created a red-black tree in a Java applet.
Oh, cool.
And so you can kind of add nodes, and it could show how the leaves, twisted up to create the balanced tree. And so something like that is just impossible. Actually, now with JavaScript, which is something that we should talk about in a future episode, things like that are possible with dynamic HTML and Canvas and all that. But for a long time, for possibly a decade, nobody had this technology besides Sun and Java.
Another weakness, we talked about that, the CLR is a Microsoft thing and the CLI. And so that, the mono is there, but it's kind of I hate to say like an afterthought. I mean, it's not meant
mono
to be
is
that.
Often an afterthought.
We were talking about it's good and it works, and if you need it and it works for you, great. But there's a lot of problems with it.
Right, that's right.
It's not as nice as using it on Windows and running. Like I can't imagine why you would be on Windows and not just run .NET framework.
Right. So I had some colleagues who were also in the PhD program, and they did their work in C#. And they had a lot of issues when they transitioned their work over to the Linux cluster, which was running Mono. For one thing, many of the libraries just don't exist, or at least didn't at the time. So they're GUI. They would try and say using system.GUI, which was something that was built into they felt was built into the C# language. But on Mono, it just would fail there. It'd say that doesn't exist. On top of that, it ended up being extremely slow. So they were just getting orders of magnitude slowdown using Mono versus using the Visual Studio virtual machine.
Well, I mean, I think this is a good segment, the advantages and disadvantages. We'll probably try to do this from now on. I'll probably try to keep it as a recurring part of our programming language discussion. But, I mean, for me, that pretty much wraps it up for C#. You got any final words to say on that?
No, I think you said it best. When you need a GUI, app in Windows, you're trying to prototype something, definitely C#. Nothing can beat it for that application.
Before we sign off here, I wanted to mention that we did get 1 or 2 more ratings on iTunes. So thank you guys for that. Those of you who did that, give you a little shout out here. You know who you are. Keep doing that. It's actually slowed down a little. So we want to keep getting those clicks so we can reach a wider audience and share what we're doing. We really enjoy this. I like doing this, sharing this stuff. This is good material. It's hard, if you if you're young and you're not at a university, or if you're at university and you're not in the computer science department, or you are and you're not understanding it or not in those classes yet, or once you get out, it's hard to keep up, and all this stuff is changing so frequently. And so doing this podcast helps us keep up. But, hope it is helping you guys. And it's, if anything, at least it's interesting, and we make fun of ourselves and mess up, and you guys can laugh at how wrong we are and how terrible we are, right. And it'll make you feel better about yourselves, So no, but we enjoy doing this, and we want more people to be able to hear us. And so tell your friends, write some reviews.
Yeah, if you find out if we say anything wrong, definitely let us know, because we're trying to learn just as much as you guys. So we both have a lot of experience in the field, but we do make mistakes, and only you can help us keep from making the same mistake twice and possibly causing forest fires.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I think that's a good note. Only you can help prevent forest fires.
That's right.
All right, take care.
See you later.
The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.